Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for Japan Foundation Touring Film Programs Associated Talk. My name is Junko Takegawa, Senior Arts Program Officer of Japan Foundation London, and I'm responsible for the programming content. In marking the 20th anniversary, the theme for this year's touring film program looks into Japanese cinema, reflecting what the program has featured in the past. Although thematically curated each year, selecting films has been purely on a merit basis. And as a result, some directors turned out to be our regulars. Director Miwa Nishikawa is one of them. I am therefore delighted to welcome Ms. Nishikawa, the director of Under the Open Sky, for our first talk. In the past 20 years, in addition to this remarkable human drama about the rehabilitation of the ex-Yakuza and the convict, we have screened Sway, Dear Doctor, and The Long Excuse, all of which were well received by audiences. Though virtual, I'm very thrilled to hear directly from her to talk about Under the Open Sky, as well as her career and works and the views on Japanese cinema in general. The conversation will be held by Dr. Irene Gonzalez-Lopez, lecturer at Birkbeck College, University in London. One of the her academic focuses is female directors from Japan, and she is very familiar with Ms. Nishikawa's work. I'm sure there will be an insightful conversation today. This event is made possible with assistance from GAGA, the distributor of Under the Open Sky, in particular, Ms. Keiko Yoshida. Thank you so much. Today's event will be recorded. As we are using the webinar function, your names will not be viewable by other attendees. However, I strongly recommend you keep your audio video muted throughout, just in case. If you have any questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A function to send your question at any time. Remember, the attendee's question may be seen by everybody else so that you can upvote a particular question placed by another person which you'd like to answer, or if it's the same as yours. Simply click that thumb up icon next to the question you wish to upvote. Unfortunately, due to time restrictions, we may not be able to pick up all of the questions you ask, so my apology in advance. And if you have seen Under the Open Sky or any other Miwa Nishikawa's work in the past, just throw your comment on the chat box so that we can send it to the Director Nishikawa later on. Lastly, as always, we will send you online questionnaire, so please spare a short moment to complete it for our future event. That's all from me. So I'd now like to invite Director Nishikawa and Irene, and then translator, interpreter Bethan Jones to help Director Nishikawa. Over to you. お願いします。
Thank you, Junko, for this introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It's a great honor to be here in conversation with Director Nishikawa Miwa, who is certainly at the forefront of Japanese contemporary cinema. And she has succeeded in being well recognized among both critics and popular audiences, both in Japan and abroad. So since her debut in 2003, she has directed 6 feature films and also several short films and a short documentary as well for television. And I'm very excited to be here today because among her 6 feature films are some of my favorite contemporary Japanese films. So thank you so much for joining us today, Nishikawa-san, and welcome to this event.
こんにちはですね。こんにちは。映画監督の西川です。今日はこのようなイベントにお招きいただきまして誠にありがとうございます。
So
good evening, no, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nishikawa. I'm a film director, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here today.
Sorry, Ben. So today we're going to be talking about her latest film, Under an Open Sky, that was released in 2021. And as Junko was saying, screened in this year's Japan Foundation Touring Film Program. But I also want to talk about her entire career, her approach to filmmaking and writing, because Nishikawa-san is also a writer, and just ask her a bit also about what her thoughts are about Japanese contemporary film industry. But before we start, let's watch the trailer of Under an Open Sky to get in the mood for Nishikawa's films, and also because this film integrates many of the themes that I feel are consistent and recurrent in her career. So let's give that a taste.
相手にしない方がいいんじゃないですか？放送に耐えられる対象じゃないですよ。
そこが面白いんじゃん。
下町で暮らす優しくてまっすぐすぎるこの男、三上。実は人生の大半を刑務所で過ごした元殺人犯だった。今度ばっかりは固いぞ。素晴らしき世界。
Great, it's such a wonderful film. I wanted to start by asking you about your early career and how you got into filmmaking. You started working in film while you were still a university student at Waseda, specializing in literature. And you, as far as I understood, it was KORE-EDA Hirokazu, the director, who hired you as an assistant for his film Afterlife. And after that, actually, at quite a young age, you debuted with your first feature film, Wild Berries, in 2003. So I wanted to ask you, when did you know that you wanted to become a filmmaker? What age or what triggered in you that interest? And also to hear a bit, how was the shoot of Wild Berries? How was your first experience as film director?
映画が好きな子供だったので、お小遣いを握りしめて街の映画館にハリウッドの映画ですけどね、グーニーズとかインディ・ジョーンズなんかを見に行ってました。
I loved films as a child. I would go to the local cinema with my pocket money in my hand and watch, well, they were Hollywood films back then. Goonies, Indiana Jones.
日本の広島県というところに生まれまして、やっぱり地方都市ですのでね、自分の周囲に映画の仕事をしているような人は一人もいなかったですし、ましてや女性でそういう仕事についてるっていう人もいなかったので、私自身は映画が好きだったけれども、自分が映画の仕事に就くっていう発想はなく、ただ文章を書くのが子供の頃から好きだったし、得意だったので、文章を書く仕事に多分就くんだろうなと思いながら文学部に進学しました。
I lived in Hiroshima Prefecture in Japan, which is very rural, and there was no one around me working in film, and particularly no women. And so although I loved film, I had no concept of it as something that I could actually do as a job. But I did like writing as a child, and I was good at it. So I had this idea that maybe I would make a living from writing, and that's why I went to university and studied literature.
どちらかというと、海外の映画を見て影響されることが多かったんですけれども、日本で映画を作ってもこういうものが存在するんだっていうふうに考え方が変わったのは、北野武さんのデビュー作で、 その男凶暴につきというのが非常にショックでしたよね。日本映画ってまた海外の映画とも違う世界観とか描き方っていうのがあるんだなと、改めて感じたのが15歳ぐらいだったかなと思います。
Most of the films I was watching and being influenced by at that point were foreign films. And the first time that I felt that Japan could also produce that level of film was when I saw Kitano Takeshi's debut film, which was a huge shock because I realized that Japanese films had something different and different sensibility, and that was the first time I realized that. I was about 15.
大学の文学部に行ってたんですけれども、いろんな日本映画、ヨーロッパ映画にも触れていくうちに、やっぱり映画の仕事がしてみたいなというふうな希望が、自分の中でそういう映画熱のようなものが膨らんできて、文章を書く仕事だったらもう少し年を取ってからでもつけるかもしれないなと思いまして、映画界に職を探しました。
As I was studying literature at university, I watched all sorts of Japanese and foreign European films. And that's when I started to think that I would like to work in the film industry, and my passion for film grew. And I thought that maybe I could come back to writing when I was a bit older, maybe, and started looking for work in film.
ただ映画のエンドクレジットの中にはもう数百っていう人の名前がありますし、そのうちどこかに自分のポストがあるんじゃないかなっていうような考えで映画界に仕事を探したんですけれども、1990年代って日本の映画界って本当に斜陽産業と言われていて、一番工業的にも落ち込んでいた時代だったので、映画業界の中で正式に誰かを社員として採用してたりっていう枠や窓口を見つけることがとても難しくて、であれば映像の仕事を何らかしていれば映画につながるかもしれないという思いで、是枝監督が当時所属されていたテレビマンユニオンという会社の面接を受けに行きました。
When I watched films, there were hundreds of names in the credits, and I thought there must be a job for me in there somewhere. And so I started looking for work in the film industry. But the 1990s in Japan, the film industry was kind of on its way down. It was at the lowest point of the industry, and it was really hard to find someone who would take me on full time in the film industry as an employee. But I thought that if I could get involved in TV or film in some way, that could lead on to working in movies. And so I interviewed for the production company TV Man Union, where KORE-EDA was working at the time.
何か映画作りに奉仕できる仕事なら何でもいいと本当に思っていたんですね。ですから映画監督になるっていうような発想は全くなかったんですが、たまたまその面接に行った会社に映画監督でデビューされてまだ間もなかった是枝監督が在籍されていて、あそこの小部屋が空いたからあなたそこの部屋に入ってって言われた小さいブースの中に是枝監督がいらっしゃったんです。私も幻の光という是枝さんの映画実は見てなかったんだけど映画監督だってことで素直に私も映画の仕事をしたいんですということを申し上げましたら、その会社の就職面接自体は落ちちゃったんですけども、ちょうど是枝さんの2作目のワンダフルライフという作品の、脚本のためのリサーチをされている時期で、なんとかそのリサーチを手伝ってくれる若いアシスタントが欲しいと思っておられて、フリーランスでよければ手伝わないかというふうにお声掛けいただいたのが最初の出発です。
すいません、確認していいですか？ 小部屋空いてるって言われたのが、面接の時？
面接会場のね、たくさんブースがあって、その中に入ってって言われたんです。
はい。I wanted to be involved in some way in making films. I hadn't crossed my mind at that point to be a director, but I went for this interview, and it just so happened that director KORE-EDA worked at this company, and he had recently made his debut film. And they pointed me in the direction of this little booth in the interview room, and he was in there. So I went in, and I hadn't actually seen his film Maboroshi at the time. But I knew that he was a director, so I said that I wanted to work in film as well. I didn't get the job at the company, but right about that time, he was researching the screenplay for Afterlife, and he needed an assistant. So he said to me, as long as you're okay with working on a freelance basis, you can come and help me.
それを出発にして、是枝監督の作品の助監督もやりましたし、他の何人かの監督の下で現場の経験を積みながら映画作りというものを学んでいったんですけれども、是枝さんがですね、やっぱり再三早く企画を書いて、脚本を上げて監督になれと、背中を押してくださったんですね。で、私としては、なんか映画監督になろうと思ってたわけじゃないんだけどなと思いながら、ただ書くのは好きでしたので、日本の映画の現場っていうのは非常に過酷で悲惨なので、その辛すぎる現場から逃げる口実のように、休んで家にこもって、脚本を書いたのがデビュー作の、ヘビチゴという作品の元になりました。
So that was where it started. I worked for KORE-EDA as an assistant director, and then went on to work for a number of other directors as well, and got experience being on set and learned about filmmaking. And KORE-EDA pushed me to get on with it, to write, and to start directing. But because I never had the idea that I was going to be a director, but I liked writing. Writing for me was a way of escaping from the front line of filmmaking, which was quite tough and hard at the time, and to get away from that and to shut myself in my room and write. And what I ended up writing was my first film, Wild Berries.
そんな経緯です。
And that's how it happened.
Fantastic. That's so interesting, right? The different ways in which people end up directing films is always interesting for me to know. And for me, Wild Berries is actually one of my favorite films of yours. I find it so funny and so refreshing. And I actually realized that the director of photography is Yamamoto Hideo, who used to work also with Kitano Takeshi, and also in Audition and Ringu. So it has this kind of horror, dark humor, I think, feeling to it, perhaps. It's also this collaboration with Yamamoto. But one of the key themes for me in Wild Berries, but also throughout your entire filmography, is this focus on what is to be a bad person, or the kind of ambiguity of moral standards, or what makes someone bad, or what is the limit of doing bad things, who decides what is evil. And I just wanted to ask you if you agree, if you find that is a central theme in your films, and also if that's the case, why are you interested in this subject?
そうですね。初期の頃は特に善悪二元論みたいな、そういうものに対する反発的な作風だったのかなと今振り返れば思います。
Yeah, I think in my early days particularly, that was my reaction to this polarized idea of good versus evil.
多くの特にエンターテインメントの映画っていうのは多く悪人っていうのはとことん悪い人で、 主人公のはもうとことん善人っていう描き方で、まあそれがこう最初から最後まで、貫かれるということが多くて、まあそのキャラクターのありよう自体に観客も疑問を抱かずに気持ちよく、善が悪を成敗するという話をこう楽しむというのが全世界的にあると思うんですけれども、その悪人って本当に100% 悪なのかとか、善人っていうのは本当に 100% そうなのかっていうところに、常に疑問が自分自身にもありまして、そういうものがこう反転していく、あるいはどちらも入り混じったり、善意と思われているものが一番人を傷つけたりっていうところが、本当のこう人間社会の難しさであったり、争い事の根本だと思うので、そんなもんじゃないだろうっていう反発から若い頃はそういうテーマが中心だったかなと思います。
In films, particularly in entertainment films, the bad guy is always hideously evil, and the protagonists are always 100% good, all the way through the film, and no one really questions this. It feels comfortable, and we enjoy watching good overcoming evil, and that's a worldwide thing, I think. But I always questioned whether the bad guys could possibly be 100% bad, and whether the good guys could really be 100% good. And thought about ways to overturn this, or to show that it wasn't black and white, and that sometimes this idea of good is actually what hurts people the most. And that's one of the hardest things about society, and the biggest causes of conflict. And I think that this was maybe my response to that.
I think the female protagonist of Wild Berries really embodies that kind of dilemma, right? Like always sticking to the rules, to what is supposed to be the right thing, to do the good thing. And that doesn't always work like that or plays well for her, right? And she those kind of challenges are very present in the film, and as I was saying, in all your films, I think. And I found very interesting what you were saying about the 100% good, 100%. But I sometimes have the impression in your films that you start with what seem like stock characters, like a bit stereotypical, and you start kind of peeling and finding, revealing layers that are behind and complicating those characters. And for me, that's one of the most interesting aspects of your films. And certainly always, I think, a sense of humor also that you incorporate to your films. What do you think? Are you interested in humor? Do you find it a useful strategy in this, to talk about this subject that seems quite deep and transcendental?
ユーモアを持って映画をうまく描けるということが一番難しいことだと思ってます。私は必ずしも、全然上手じゃないですね。
Using humor well in film is the hardest thing to do, and I'm not always good at it.
ただ、ホームドラマ、ヘビイチゴの場合はホームドラマでしたけど、やっぱりそのテーマの核心はそんなに心地よい、ものではないので、そういうものを人に見せていく上では、そのユーモアというものとか、が人に見てもらう、最後まで見てもらうための、推進力になるだろうというふうには思ってました。ですから、それが作品によっては、例えば2作目の揺れるという作品では、サスペンス的な要素、事件の真相は何かということがそれに変わるものだったり、作品ごとにその人が本当は直視したくないテーマを見せるためにどういう、 パッケージが必要かということで、表現方法としていろいろ模索中です。
With Wild Berries, it's a family drama, and it deals with uncomfortable themes. And so in order to keep the audience watching through to the end, I think humor is the way that I've done that. But it depends on the film. With my next film, Sway, that role is played by the sense of suspense, trying to find out what actually happened in this accident. So I think I'm continually experimenting to find ways to package the content of a film so that an audience will keep watching something which isn't necessarily an easy watch or easy to face head on.
Yeah, I think for me, sometimes the humor in your films reminds me of Imamura Shohei. This kind of dark humor and very like the dark side of families and relationships. But as you're saying, I find it very interesting how you're able to mix genres very often in your films and to change, as you were saying, from project to project, what films demand. So for instance, in Under the Open Sky, there's obviously references to Yakuza films, but also the Western, I feel like in The Jewel, is that scene seems to me like a Western or even a video game sometimes, that fighting scene. But in other films, you have this courtroom kind of suspense. So I find it very interesting how you are able to navigate and combine all those genres. And another thing that I think is quite relevant in your films, you have this central characters that are facing usually a trauma or a moral dilemma, or a difficult situation, but they're always very charismatic. And I think this comes back to what you were saying about not being 100% good or bad, that this charisma allows them, I think, also to, even though they're sometimes doing bad things, we feel empathy, we sympathize with them. And another thing that is often brought about in relation also to this charisma and trauma is the fact that most of your films focus on male characters, male protagonists. You have very strong female characters. And for instance, in Dreams for Sale, there's another of my favorite films. I love the character of the wife, and of course in Wild Berries as well, another of your films, but most of your films focus on male protagonists. So I wanted to ask you if this is a conscious decision, what's behind that choice?
よく質問されるんだけど、あんまり自分でもなぜなのかが分からずに20年やってきました。
I'm often asked that, but I've been doing this for 20 years now, and I don't know.
思いついたモチーフで、男女どちらの性別の方がよりポピュラーかという考え方に基づいてキャラクターの性別を選んできたつもりです。
I think I've chosen my characters' genders based on what would be the most popular for the particular motif that I have in mind.
女性の作家なら女性を描くのが上手だろうというふうに一般的には思われるかもしれないんですが、私は女性の性別だけれども、決してその世の中全般の女性を自分がうまく描けるとはちょっと言い切れない部分もありますし、むしろ男性のキャラクターで描いていく方が作り手と同一視されなくて済むっていう安心感のもとに、ちょっと自由になれるんですね、キャラクター表現が。
A lot of people tend to think that a female filmmaker will be good at depicting female characters, but although I'm female, I can't say that means that I can speak for all the women in the world. And at the same time, I think male protagonists offer a sense of safety in that no one's going to mistake them for me. And so I have more freedom in that sense.
That's very interesting, the idea of a pressure of, if I am to represent women, to be like symbolizing everything that I feel about womanhood or something like that, that pressure that perhaps is relief if you actually focus on male characters. But I always find very strong and refreshing female characters in your films as well, or not the stereotypical. So I think that's also the secondary characters are very rounded, and I think that adds also to the quality of the story. And now I actually wanted to ask you about your writing work, because you're not only a director, you're always the script writer of your films, and you also write novels and other texts, and sometimes even edit work in edited volumes. So some of you've also sometimes adapt, right, novels that you've written into films, such as Long Excuse, but also sometimes you've written a novel based on a film you've directed, such as in Sway, and sometimes kind of spin-offs, right? Like Dear Doctor, you then wrote a fiction story that was a spin-off of the film. So I wanted to hear a bit more about your working process. Like, how do you feel it's different to write a script than a novel, for instance? Or do you already have an image of the film in mind when you're writing a novel? Are you sure you're going to be adapting that text after that as you're preparing it? Are you already envisioning how it can be adapted to other media? And just those kind of questions I'm very curious to hear about.
一作ごとにトライアルをしているという感じで、いつもこうだからという決まりがあるわけではないんですけれども。
It varies from film to film. There's no particular rule.
映画ってやっぱりおよそ2時間前後で物語を作るという、非常に時間的制約のはっきりした表現だと思うんですよね。だけれども、自分の中では、例えば主人公の設定があったとして、その主人公の人生のどの瞬間を切り取って2時間のドラマにすればいいのかっていうものが、まだ見えないところからスタートする場合もあります。ちょっとここまでお願いします。
A film tends to be around 2 hours long, so it's a medium that has a very clear time restriction on the story. But for me, sometimes when I come up with a character, I can only feature one part of their life in that 2-hour time slot, and sometimes I don't know what part of their life I actually want to show.
すらすら2時間サイズのストーリーを思い浮かぶ才能があればいいんですけど、なかなかそうもいかなくて、一人一人のキャラクターを作っている上で、結構生い立ちからノートに書いていくっていう作業があるんですね。多くの脚本家はやられてることだとは思いますけども。それを書き溜めていくと、まあこんな小さなエピソードや背景は絶対に2時間のドラマの中には組み込めないんだけれども、実はこの撮るに足らないドラマが面白いなって自分でも思うことがあるんです。ですので、映画を撮った後に、あれだけ面白い素材があったんだから、 ちょっと残して世の中に出しとくかっていう思いで、後から小説を書く場合もありますね。
It would be great if I were able to sit down and come up with a story that fits perfectly within 2 hours. But I can't do that. And when I write each character, I tend to start from their childhood and their background, as I think a lot of writers do, and write their life in my notebook. And as I'm writing, I might come across aspects of their background, particular things that happen to them that I know won't make it into the film, but are really interesting. And so once I've made the film, sometimes I find myself thinking that I want people to have the opportunity to read about those things. And so I might write a novel.
とにかく同じ文章を書いてるようでも、映画の脚本と小説の一行っていうのは全く意味が違って、映画は一行書いただけで何百万円、何百人という人が関わってくるんです。もう失敗できないんです、一行の表現が。ですから自分が許されたバジェットの中で、この表現書いていいのかなとか、この一行のセリフを足すことで、尺が何秒伸びちゃうんだろうっていうことを考えながら、セリフの一言一句を、ものすごく気を使って書かなきゃいけないんですね。それから自由になりたくて、小説をたまに書いているところはありますね。
Even though you're writing a story in both cases, writing a screenplay and writing a novel are completely different in terms of the significance that each line has. When you're writing a screenplay for a film, each line is worth millions of yen and hundreds of people, and you can't afford to get it wrong. You're thinking of the budget, you're thinking, well, is it okay to put this line in? How many seconds worth of film is this line going to take up? You have to be so careful when you're writing a screenplay, and sometimes writing a novel is my way of releasing myself from those restrictions.
キャラクターの、例えば幼年期について、そういうテーマで小説を一編書くことで、自分自身がそのキャラクターの人間性であるとか、こういう事態の時にどのように反応するかっていう、そのキャラクターの行動原理っていうのが見えてくるのもあって、映画作りに入る前の自分のその表現の可動域を広げる作業としても小説を書くという時間を使うことがあります。
But at the same time, when I'm writing a character and about their background and their childhood, that's telling me about the character and what kind of a person they are, how they react to things. It gives me the reasons and the motivations for their actions. And so sometimes writing a novel before I start making a film is a way of giving impetus to the characters in the film and helping my understanding of them.
映画監督をやってるといろんな質問を多くのスタッフや俳優からされますので、それに対してやっぱりある程度の自信を持って回答していく、あるいは演じる俳優から何か質問があったときに、彼らを不安にさせないような材料を蓄えておくという意味でも、自分が小説を書いて、そのキャラクターについて深く解釈しておくというのは、自分のための、自分の自信を作るための時間なのかなというふうにも思いますね。
At the same time, as a director, you get asked all sorts of questions by the crew and by the actors, and you need to be confident in your answers. I don't want to, if an actor's asking me about questions about how to perform the character, I don't want to confuse them. And so I want to have this base of knowledge and understanding and an interpretation of the characters. And sometimes sometimes writing the novel is the time that I need to gain that confidence for myself.
I think it's fantastic that you can combine those two ways of thinking and of creating, because I do find your films to be quite heavy in dialogue and relying on dialogue, but at the same time very visual. And also what I was saying before about the humor is often quite visual as well. So, but I was thinking then with this, what you were telling us about building the characters and this kind of creating the story in your head, right, to every last detail. How was then the experience of Under the Open Sky? Because this is the first time you're not adapting, you're the script writer, but you're not adapting, it's not an original script and it's not an adaptation of your own writing. It's based on a book by Saki Ryuzo of 1990 called Mibuncho, so which is not even fiction. So I wanted to ask you, how was the process of adapting the book and also of actualizing it? Because from 1990, many things have changed, not only in Japanese society in general, but also the Yakuza and how they operate or how they are perceived in society. And yeah, well, let's start there. I have many more questions.
今ご紹介にあったように、実際の事件に関わった人をモチーフにした小説なんですけれども、元は。私、やっぱりその実在の犯罪者の話とか映画っていうのが自分でも好きだったんですね。でそれを小説家では佐々さんが実在した人を徹底的に取材していくつも小説を書かれてましたし、また佐木隆三さんの小説を先ほど名前が出た今村監督も、映画化されて、復讐するは我にありという作品を撮られて大好きなんです。なので単純に一ファンとしてその佐木さんの本に出会いました。
Well, as you say, it's based on an actual incident, a novel about this real life incident that happened. And I love true crime and watching films based on true crime incidents. And Saki Ryuzo, the author of this book, interviewed several criminals and wrote a number of novels, one of which was turned into a film by Imamura Shohei, who you mentioned earlier, called Vengeance is Mine, which I absolutely love. And so I was a fan, pure and simple, and I came across this book.
そうですね。10年以上でしょうね、監督になってから自分の中から出たオリジナルの作品を何本か作ってきて、まあそれはそれで良かったんですけれども、だんだんこうやっぱり自分の中から出てくる発想だけだと、退屈だなと思うようになってしまって、外からのインプットにアイデアをもらうことの方が多くなってきました。そういう中で、身近な人間関係とか、ありふれた日常生活というものではなく、自分の人生で会ったこともないような、その、元殺人犯の暮らしっていう、まあ、私の経験からは生まれなかった物語に触れたときにですね、まあ派手な犯罪小説ではないんだけれども、その元犯罪者であったり、元ヤクザっていう人が社会復帰するという地味な物語が、いかに逆に冒険に満ちているか。非常にこう感情的にも揺さぶられるものが多いかというものをその小説の中から発見して、自分が知らなかったことを映画作りを通して自分も知っていきたいなという思いで、映画化することを決めました。
having been directing for 12 years and I'd made a few of films based on my own original stories, which was fine. I found that I was getting bored with my own ideas and that I was taking more ideas from external input. And that rather than human relationships and daily life, I was drawing more inspiration from things that couldn't happen in my own life. So in the case of this story about an ex-criminal, this is something that I could never have written from my own life experience, and it's not a gory piece of crime fiction. It's a quiet story of this ex-criminal, ex-Yakuza member being rehabilitated into society. But the novel taught me how much of an adventure that is and how much emotion is involved. And I thought that I wanted to do something with film, this film that I couldn't have done just by myself.
Bringing in some of the questions that we have in the Q&A box, Jamie Morris asks if you could give us a few examples on where you decided to deviate from the real life story to turn this nonfiction novel into a fiction film. So what examples of what did you add? And also relatedly, Muriel Summersgill also asked if you did any research on Yakuza world for the film.
はい。佐木隆三さんって作家はあったことしか書かないそうなんですね。なので、非常にドラマ性がない小説だったんです。本当にこれで終わりなのかって思うぐらい、何の、クライマックスもないままに小説は終わってて、それがやっぱり小説の自由さだなと思って、私は大好きなんだけれども、これじゃあ映画にならないなと思って、ご覧になった方はわかると思いますけれども、物語の終盤、三上が介護施設に、就職して、そこで、障害者の職員が働いている。そこからの人間トラブルっていうのは、私がオリジナルで書いた展開ですね。
Well, Saki Ruzo only writes apparently what actually happened. So the novel is not dramatic at all. It leaves you thinking, is that it? Because it ends without any kind of climax. And that's the freedom that you have when you're writing a novel, and I love that. But I knew that wouldn't work for a film. So if you've seen the film, you'll know that at the end, Mikami finds a job in a care home. And one of his colleagues has disabilities, and there are some issues that arise as a result of that, and that's something that I added in myself.
ヤクザについてのリサーチですけれども、これもさっきおっしゃったように30年以上前に書かれた小説なので、当時の日本のいわゆるヤクザと、今のヤクザが迎えている状況というのは随分変わっています。法律や条例も変わっていて、簡単に言うと当時ほどヤクザが社会で幅を利かせることができない社会になりました。
ごめんなさい、幅を利かせるってどういうですか？
なんていうのかな。派手に、なんて言ったらいいんだろうね。
OK、わかりました。はい。You asked about my research into the Yakuza. And as you say, this book was written 30 years ago. So the situation of the Yakuza then and now has changed quite a lot. There have been changes to the law and the regulations. And simply put, the Yakuza are not able to make their presence felt as much now as they were then.
警察は ヤクザを完全に社会から締め出すという動きになって、ヤクザから足を洗いなさいとキャンペーンを張って、実際その数は減ってるんですけれども、じゃあそのヤクザから足を洗った人がきちんと社会復帰して一般の社会で生きていけるような受け皿を用意しているかというと、全くそれは用意されてなくて、劇中にもあったように携帯電話も作られなければ、本当に子供を幼稚園にも入れられないというような、その社会で生きていけないような状況に置かれて、ますます逆に生きる場所がなくなり、犯罪がもっと目に見えないところに潜っていったり、あるいは昔はヤクザ同士で抗争していて、一般人には危害は及ばないっていう不分率のようなものがあったのが、彼らの収入源が、断たれることで、より弱い、それこそ今大問題になってますけれども、お年寄りからお金を巻き上げたり、強盗に入ったりという犯罪がより悪質化しているというような状況に変わってきました。
The police have tried to eradicate the Yakuza, to eliminate them from society. There have been campaigns, wash your hands of the Yakuza. And so the numbers have fallen. But once ex-Yakuza members have washed their hands of the Yakuza, you have to think, well, is there now a place for them in society? Are things set up so that they can rehabilitate themselves into society? And there isn't. There is no place for them now. As we saw in the film, they can't get a mobile phone contract. They can't put their children in nursery. It's very difficult for them to live in society, and that there's nowhere for them to go, which means that they turn to crime, but that crime has to be more underground, more hidden. And whereas before there was more a sense of Yakuza dealing with Yakuza, and so that ordinary people were to an extent protected from the fallout. Now, because of they've lost their sources of income, they turn to forms of criminality that steal from the elderly, for example, robbery, and that is also a way in which it's changed.
I love the characters of the old Yakuzas and this world that they're living of the old glory. You suddenly realize that he has lost his legs. The character in the background, this very old man that works as a gardener, that maybe was like a fearsome Yakuza 40 years ago, but now he's a gardener and they live in this isolated world. I think it's very well explained from different perspectives, this very difficult problem that the idea of getting rid of the Yakuza is good, but how do you actually implement that in society? And we're running out of time. I know there's many questions in the Q&A. So incorporating some questions in the chat, I wanted to now ask you about contemporary Japanese cinema as an industry. You debuted in 2003, 20 years ago. At a similar time, several other now very well-established female directors also debuted, such as Ongigami Naoko, Tanada Yuki, and others. But that was something new, right? This is part of this new wave. You were mentioning how in the early 1990s, the industry was in quite a low situation, but the late 1990s, the turn of the century, marks this renaissance of the Japanese cinema industry. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, how do you think the working conditions of female directors, of women in the industry, have changed in these 20 years? How they have perhaps improved, or the impact of you and other directors also, such as Ninagawa Mika or Iguchi Nami working, has had a positive impact perhaps for future generations? And also, more in general, what do you think are the challenges of the industry today? Also, There's a question from Mural about female directors and a question about the contemporary contemporary industry by Kiyomi Unten, and they mention, for instance, the impact of platforms such as Netflix on the industry today.
はい。残念ながら日本の女性監督を取り巻く労働環境っていうのは、ものすごく遅れてると思います。
Unfortunately, I think the working conditions for female directors in Japan are very much lagging behind.
私が映画監督を始めたのは20年前ですけれども、その当時は本当にまだ女性監督っていう人はとても少なかったですし、私自身にもそのロールモデルのようなものないままに、なんか映画監督なんかできると思えないって思いながら、当惑しながらこの仕事を始めましたし、それを続けていくには、多分人並みの生活というものは諦めないと成り立たないだろうなという、ある覚悟のようなものをしながら続けてきたと思います。
When I started 20 years ago, there were very few women directors, and I didn't really have a role model as I was starting out. When I started, I didn't think it was actually possible to be a director, and I had this kind of awareness that I would have to give up on the idea of having a normal life if this was something I wanted to do.
先ほどお名前が出たような日本の女性監督は、それぞれ家庭を持たれている方もいらっしゃいますし、お子さんがいらっしゃる方もいらっしゃる。ですから、自分の生活スタイルに合わせながら監督業を続けられていると思いますけれども、多分それを続けるためには、かなりそのサポートに対して完全に自分の努力、そういう自助努力で続けてこられたケースが多いと思いますね。
The directors that you mentioned just now, some of them have families, some of them have children, and so they have been able to lead this career and work it around their lifestyle. But I think they've had to work very hard to achieve that.
ただ20年前に比べて、私も含めてそうやって何人もの女性監督が出てきたことで、もしかしたら若い世代にとっては、映画監督という職業が男性だけがやるものだという価値観は崩れているかもしれません。そのおかげでやっぱり若い人が、それはデジタル機器の普及も伴って、その長い期間、助監督を経なくても映画監督をやるチャンスも増えましたし、若い女性の作り手たちが自由に自分の作品を作っていろんなコンペに出したりっていう活動は随分盛んになったと思います。
But compared to 20 years ago when I started, there are a lot more women directors, including myself, and maybe that has helped the younger generation to believe that being a film director is not just a job for a man. And for the younger generation, there are various advancements, including in digital technology, that mean that you don't have to spend all this time being an assistant director before you can start directing your own work. And more young female directors have the freedom to create their own work and to enter it into competitions. There are a lot more coming up now.
ただ、これ監督に限らず、カメラマンや、録音技師や、いろんな職業に共通しますけれども、やっぱり若い人が希望を持ってそういう職業に就きたいと思ってたくさん入ってきてくれるんですけれども、長く続けていけないんですよね。というのはやはり出産や育児というライフイベントと両立が耐えられない労働時間であったり、低いギャランティーであったり、子育てを支援する体制が 映画界の中にもないし、社会の側にも整っていないという、日本社会全体の問題が影響してくるんですけれども、このままだとやっぱり男性シフトの働き方が続いていくと思いますし、女性が少ないということは、おそらく作られていく作品の作風も刷新されていかないので、これはやっぱり自分たちの世代が、こういうものだというふうに思い込んできたマインドを刷新してですね、もっと多くの人が、自分の健康とか生活っていうものを大切にしながら、映画作りというものに取り組んでいかないと、日本の映画界というのは絶対に遅れていくなっていうふうに自覚してます。
Having said that, and this doesn't just go for directors, but for camera operators, sound operators, lots of young people now have this desire to work in filmmaking and they join the industry, but a lot of the time it's hard for them to keep going in the industry for women, because at some point they might have a baby, they might need to raise children, and it's hard. It's an industry where it's hard to strike that balance, as well as the pay being low. The Japanese film industry isn't set up to be able to do that, and neither is society. That's something that reflects back on Japanese society as a whole, and for that reason, this shift towards men in the industry, I think, will continue, and with fewer women managing to remain in the industry, the types of films being made won't change. And as long as we have these fixed ideas of the way society works, I think we need to start thinking more about our health and about our lifestyles. And as long as we don't do that, the Japanese industry, I think, is going will continue to lag behind.
I think it's very important what you're saying about the role models, and also the idea that it's so important to have a diversity within those making films at all different levels and roles, to create diverse films and to really let that talent and creativity thrive. And as you're saying, a lot of the problems, I think, are transnational or universal to film industry because of the working conditions it entails. But Japanese industry, according to surveys, seems to be especially difficult for women and for other kind of minorities, underrepresented minorities. So could you please just very briefly tell us, what do you think? Perhaps this is the greatest challenge of the industry today, the idea of diversity. And but what do you think is the biggest challenge? And what do you think is the biggest improvement that you've seen in the industry in this last 20 years?
もう今おっしゃったところが最も改善しなければならない喫緊の課題だと思いますね。実際本当に人口減少している上に、若い人がどんどん現場を離れていって、どこの現場も人手がいないっていうことがものすごく叫ばれているので、この人たちに映画作りというものが素晴らしい仕事なんだと実感してもらって続けていくためには、いろんな環境整備を業界が自ら自覚を持ってしていかないともう持たないなと思ってます。
I think it's what you've said, that this is the biggest challenge that we face and the biggest change that we need. The population is declining. Young people are leaving the workforce. Every industry is lacking people. And we need young people to think that working in film is an attractive prospect and is something that they want to do. And for that to happen, the industry needs to be aware of what needs to change and to make those changes, or it won't survive.
日本の映画界は特にかもしれないんですけど、なかなかその横のつながりというのが持てずに来てしまっ たんですね。監督同士も、海外の映画祭で出会うっていうような機会しか、お互いにこうコミュニケートする機会がなかったり、自分の作品を作るっていうことが映画監督にとっては一番の、タスクであることはそうなんですけれども、ただその環境づくりのために映画監督が、声を発したり、連帯したり、何か求めていくっていうことも一つのこう役割なのかもしれないなっていうことを、最初の10年では到底思いも及ばなかったですけれども、私自身もある程度キャリアを重ねたので、そういう役割をなんとか務めていければなというふうに思うようになりました。
In the Japanese film industry in particular, film directors don't tend to connect with each other. Sometimes the only opportunity they'll get to meet other Japanese directors is when they go to overseas film festivals. And for them, making their films is the most important job, which is fair enough. But if we want to improve the environment in the industry, I think directors need to be speaking out and working together and making demands. I think that is another important role that they need to be playing. And for the first 10 years or so of my career, that's not something that would have crossed my mind. But now that I have this certain degree of experience, I think that's a role that I want to take on as well.
There's this fascinating project called Japan Film Project, and they're working on, is led by people in the industry, by filmmakers, and they are doing surveys about, for instance, especially gender gap in the industry, but part of the project is also advocacy and trying to actually change and see what are the, so I think that is moving and it is happening, certainly very necessary. So thank you so much for this fantastic conversation. I've tried to incorporate some questions from the chat also throughout the hour, but there are unfortunately questions we didn't have time to cover. But I just thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you and sharing all these experiences.
本当にたくさんご質問をいただきましたよね。お答えできなくてごめんなさい。この作品、そうですね、素晴らしき世界という作品は、2021年に日本でも公開をしまして、全世界が本当にダメージを受けた年ですよね。すべての国際映画祭が封鎖されたり、中止されたり、オンライン開催になったりして、私も海外の方とこの映画を通じて交流をするという経験がほとんどできないままに、この作品は終わっていったんですけれども、少し時間は経ちましたけれども、こういう形で海外の方が自分の作品にも興味を持ってくださったり、日本の映画を、私の映画だけじゃなくて日本の映画全体を応援してくださってるっていうのを実感できて、とても感激しましたし、いい時間を過ごさせていただきました。どうもありがとうございます。
Well, thank you for all your questions, and I'm sorry I didn't manage to answer all of them. This film came out in 2021 in Japan, and of course that was a year the whole world was damaged, and all the international film festivals closed or were cancelled or took place online, and this film came and went really without me having an opportunity to talk to people in other countries about it. And so a bit of time has passed now, but I've been really grateful for this opportunity to discover that people in other countries are interested in my film and that they're interested in not just in my film but in Japanese film, and it's been very moving and a great opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I just popped in the wrong place, but I wasn't very sure when was the end. Anyway, that was fantastic conversation, and Nishikawa-san's answer was so articulate that everybody enjoyed the talk. And Irene, you did a very good job, because I know it's very ambitious sort of session, I can tell, because it's not only that under the open sky, but needs to go down to that, first sort of the works. I myself was a big fan of the Nishikawa's works. That's why we included so many of her works in the past touring film programs. And once I wanted to, invite Nishikawa-san into the touring film program, but her schedule wasn't really good for that timings. But in the future, I know Nishikawa-san loves UK, so I would like to invite her to that touring film program so that she can go around to different places. But warn you, it's not going to be luxurious tour. You have to go around the different places in a short span of time. So you got to keep fit and then energetic. And then I think there is a chat box, for those people who haven't seen Under the Open Sky, most of the screenings was over by now. But there is only one venue which hasn't done the screening, is Dundee Contemporary Arts Center. So it's up and north, 29th of March, but Dundee is a fantastic place. Not just in the cinema, but you can go to the museum whatsoever. So if you have a time, hop in the Dundee Contemporary Arts Center and then catch up this fabulous work. One of the most popular films in the Japan Foundation Touring Film Program. Also, that I would like to announce that Ida-san, can you bring the slides? Yes. We got another 3 more online talks. Yes, there it is. That information there. One of that, for example, yes, and tomorrow there will be 3 young directors coming up on the screen. And then on Monday, 27th, people mentioned about Tanada Yuki. Tanada Yuki will be on the screen on the same time, on 1 o'clock in the UK time. Watch out that the summertime starts. So there's a different sort of time difference between UK and the rest of the world. And then we wrap up with roundabout discussion with programmers from Tokyo International Film Festival and BFI and then other sort of experts, gather together to talk about that progress of Japanese cinema. I know there's a lot of issues to be solved, but I hope that Japanese cinema is getting better rather than going downwards. And then in the UK, we'd like to make an effort to introduce a lot of Japanese cinema to the UK audience so that they are more familiar with it. Thank you so much for a fantastic conversation and then watching this online talk event. And my last sort of word is please complete the questionnaire. We will send you the link of the questionnaire. And also thank you, Bethan. As usual, fantastic interpretation translation. Thank you so much. And have a nice afternoon wherever you are. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
ございました。